Okay, this is going to be a recap, redo of a former video that I had posted before. And it's with regards to perception and the fear control mechanism. The fear control mechanism is a handy tool of the elites, the globalists, the Illuminati, whatever label you want to place on them. They've been using this mechanism for centuries. And a lot of the misunderstanding about it is all in perception, because their biggest weapon is fear. If they can get you to be afraid, they can paralyze you. They can make you think that you have no power. And this is exactly what they do. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because if you study history, you can see that from the beginnings of civilization, really, the fear control mechanism has been in place. And basically it's just been renamed, realigned, reconfigured, and the same type of people are always in control and using the same tools. Now, a lot of people, have watched videos about the Illuminati and how they have infiltrated the music industry, media, and such, and how they use symbols and things to kind of flaunt how much control they have over all this stuff. And what I'm here to tell you is that these things are to get you to be afraid. They're to get you to not look at the history or the symbolism or any of it, so that you can make the connections that you need to make to identify the real enemy, which is them. What they've basically done is they've set up the occult secret societies, and these secret societies play off of people's egos, because everybody wants to be a part of something elite or secret or special. So what they do is they set up these secret societies, and they include only the elite into the know, or different levels of adherence into the know. And the lower on the totem pole you are, the less you really know, and you're just sort of an initiate. And the further up you get, the more revealing that information is, and the more the pieces start to fall together as to what's really going on. And they use this as leverage. They flaunt it as a status, a privilege, and this is how they con celebrities, especially, into being included in it, and they make them complicit. I'm going to try not to go over time, because I've done it a lot trying to record this video, but bear with me, because I might have to make this multiple parts. Hopefully not. But the whole thing is they use these symbols to control. They use it in the money. This is one reason why currency is something that I try not to use as much as possible. I know it's almost impossible in our society not to, but especially the $1 bill. It's got the most potent symbols of their magic on it. It also represents the person that was the most instrumental in supporting their agenda, George Washington. And you may not believe that, but he may have portrayed himself as having good intentions, but those intentions were compromised simply by the fact that he was involved in a secret society, as many of the founders were. Not all of them, of course, but many of them were. And the fact that they were involved in these secret societies made them susceptible, and their policies susceptible, to being infiltrated. So from the earliest days we see that. We also see people like Aaron Burr, who is demonized by the political establishment, and they had this huge smear campaign going against him. Well, if you look at his opponent, his political opponent, which was Alexander Hamilton, the Federal Reserve, which is just another branch of the Illuminati or the elite globalists, is enshrined on the $10 bill. Why is that? Well, because he was corrupt. He built the New York Central Bank and was getting ready to try to do the same thing in the United States. Aaron Burr recognized this danger and challenged him to a duel and shot him and killed him. Aaron Burr was charged with murder, and later the charges were dropped because it was a volatile issue. But they still tried to go after Aaron Burr. Now, why didn't it succeed? Well, we're going to see in a minute. The president at the time, and Aaron Burr was the vice president, he took his job seriously if he was willing to shoot advocate of the central bank to defend the republic. Anyway, the president at the time was Thomas Jefferson. And the reason why they were able to manipulate him was because he had an illicit affair with one of his slaves. And even though he claims he didn't treat her like a slave, and his views were very outspoken as he viewed them as members of the family, the fact that she was still a slave and she wasn't free was a scandal. So they were able to manipulate him and get him to go against Aaron Burr, who they couldn't manipulate because even though he was having an open relationship with one of his servant girls who wasn't a slave, that wasn't quite the scandal. So they were not able to manipulate him that way. However, they did raise charges against him of treason, which turned out to be hearsay, and they were dropped against him. They also went ahead and, like today, anybody who defies the government or becomes an enemy of the state or a political enemy, they try to use other means to smear his name. Like they claim that he ran off with a bunch of money from his rich wife, when in fact it probably wasn't true. And but that's just how they tried to manipulate people, and they were successful in the case of Jefferson pushing their agenda, but not so much with his vice president. So there's a lot of intrigue that went on even early on in the United States. So that's one part of it, the money and the symbols that are on it. The other thing is that they have created a boogeyman, basically. And if you go back in history, you find out how far back this goes. It's ridiculous. The Masons, which trace their lineage back to the Templars, is also a sign of infiltration. And we see that when we look back to the origins of the Templars. The Knights Templars were a group of men who guaranteed safety to pilgrims. I mean, and it didn't matter who they were. They could have been Muslim or Christian, to visit the Holy Land, because the bandits were just running rampant back then. So they figured they could cash in on this. It was very lucrative to provide security. Well, the church didn't like the fact that they had to answer to them for their safety. So they began to demonize them and hunt them down. And eventually they drew up religious charges against them of bestiality and all kinds of other crazy stuff and devil worship. Well, they're the ones, the church are the ones that created Satanism. They created it. They said that the Templars were worshiping Baphomet, but in reality it's just a corruption of Muhammad. And why did they say this? Well, in their tortures and even in their own admission, they said that part of the training that they went through, because they faced these bandits and sometimes faced capture, was a policy of training their recruits that were going to protect the pilgrims to, rather than be killed off because they wouldn't be doing any good being dead, to go ahead and feign confession of being infidels and then conversion. And then they would make it back later to the friendly lines and they would go right back to doing what they were doing. Now, typically, the Templars could go ahead and just pay off certain warlords or bandits and keep relations with them somewhat smooth. But sometimes they had to know when to pick their battles, basically. So it was a military tactic and training that they used to get the recruits to realize that It wasn't any big deal that if they survived, that they could always come back, and that as long as their deception wasn't sincere, that they were okay. So they used this against the Templars, and saying that they worshipped Muhammad, or the corruption of that word in the French was Baphomet. And then they made Baphomet into a depiction of the cartoon character of the devil, which they equated with Satan. Before that, Satan only meant the enemy, the adversary. And so what that shows you is that they cleverly diverted and misdirected people away from the real enemy and created a fake enemy for people to latch onto and fight against. And this is typical. This is what they do all the time. So be very careful. The doctrines that you believe in may not necessarily be true. They may be a twisting of the truth to propel a particular political agenda. And at that time, it was to demonize the Templars and destroy them and seize their finances so that the Roman Catholic Church would maintain their control over Europe. And it enabled them to wage war, perpetual war, religious war, in the Holy Land. And in so doing, they became even richer, because part of the policies of creating the war was to fund the war machine, and the proceeds went directly to the church. So even back then, we can say that they were doing the same thing as they're doing today in the Middle East. They want to create perpetual war to make themselves rich. It's the same thing. It's the same people, the same political agendas. Don't get it confused. Don't get caught up in emotionalism and try and defend your faith because you think that it's correct. Recognize who the real enemy is. The manipulators have their fingers in everything. Everything. They created the religions. They created the doctrines behind those religions. They've created the monetary system, the political system. And they also believe that using these symbols that they have hijacked and redefined and hiding occultism within religion is a way to control you and get you to participate in their evil rituals. So recognize that. It's not something that you should fear, so that you don't study it and you don't look at it. Because that's what I hear a lot of theologians and people that speak church doctrine say this, that you can't even look at it. It's evil. Don't even look at it. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Well, that's brainwashing. What that's telling you is that you should not study your enemy. And that's foolish, because anybody who's been in the military knows that you study your enemy. You study their tactics, you study their behavior patterns, because you want to know how to defeat them. And that's exactly what you have to do here. You have to study these patterns and these behaviors and recognize that their infiltration is throughout all of society. It's everywhere. And they try to use that fact that it is everywhere to scare you. What I'm saying is, don't be afraid. Study it. Don't let it make you afraid. Recognize your enemies. Study them. Because they are the real devil, not some cartoon character. Anyway, that's all I got to say about it. And if you like it, spread it. If not, oh well. Maybe you just need a little more time to study. That's it for now. Bye.